Welcome back. US President Donald Trump has announced that Israel has agreed on terms for a 60-day ceasefire in Gaza. He also warned Hamas to accept the deal before conditions worsen. Hamas has reportedly suggested that it is open to a ceasefire agreement that puts a complete end to the war, but it stopped short of accepting the US-backed plan. Israel has not yet publicly commented on Trump's announcement. However, Israel's strikes on Gaza continue, with more than 30 people killed in Gaza in the last 24 hours. Meanwhile, more than 600 Palestinians have been killed in the last 5 weeks while waiting in queues for food assistance. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will meet US President Trump as well as the Trump administration's top officials at the White House next week. In a post on social media, Netanyahu said the meetings come in the wake of Operation Rising Lion that targeted Iran's nuclear and military installations. After multiple failed attempts at a truce between Israel and Hamas, will there finally be one? Joining us now to discuss this is Eylon Levy, former Israeli government spokesperson. Thank you for joining us. Eylon, let me begin by asking you, will this now lead to talks which will eventually end this war and complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza?
We can only hope that we are approaching an end of the horrible war that Hamas started nearly 2 years ago. But the ball is now in Hamas's court. President Trump says Israel has agreed to the terms of a ceasefire, and Hamas now needs to agree. It needs to release the hostages, and crucially, this will allow time for a diplomatic solution for the day after the war. But the day after the war must mean the day after Hamas. Israel is demanding this war has to end, with Hamas laying down its arms, its leaders going into exile, and allowing a new government in the Gaza Strip that will focus on peaceful reconstruction instead of trying to build Hamas's war machine against Israel. So remains to be seen how Hamas is going to act, but positive news that Israel may be getting at least some of the hostages back. They've been so cruelly held in tunnels, and time for a diplomatic solution for the world to tell Hamas, it's game over, time's up, you need to relinquish power.
Right, but Eylon, more than 56,500 people have been killed since this war began. More than 130,000 have been wounded. Isn't this a large enough cost of war? Isn't it time for Israel to stop the offensive?
Well, Israel's goal is to eliminate the risk of another October 7th massacre, because the first thing that Hamas did after it invaded on October 7th, butchered Israelis at a music festival, massacred families in their homes, and took 250 hostages, was to promise to do it again. In fact, there are still sirens in southern Israel because Hamas is still firing missiles at Israel. So what Israel wants is to make sure there's no risk that a jihadi Islamist army on our doorstep can invade and take hostages again. There has been a terrible cost to this war. Too many people have been killed, too many people have been hurt. But the responsibility lies with the terrorist organization that launched this war and refuses to end this war by letting go of those poor hostages and letting go of power.
Right. Now, when it comes to ending this war, what is the diplomatic solution? And will you be making the diplomatic solution? Will the Israeli government want that solution to be a part of any agreement to end the war as well?
The diplomatic solution runs through Qatar, because Qatar is not a mediator. Qatar is Hamas's patron. Qatar has been pushing since the beginning of the war for a ransom that would leave Hamas in power, basically telling Hamas to keep the hostages until it gets the terms that it wants. Hamas's leaders live in Qatar. Qatar can end this war tomorrow if it tells Hamas's leaders they must release the hostages, or they'll be extradited to the United States to face trial for crimes against humanity. So it's important that if we get a 60-day ceasefire, we don't just run down the clock and then Hamas continues to rain terror inside Gaza. The Arab states must pressure Hamas to lay down their arms, to go into exile, and allow for a new government with the backing of moderate Arab states that will mean that Gaza is no longer a base for terrorism against Israelis, and that the people in Gaza are no longer under the control of the Hamas regime.
Right. How are you going to achieve this? And will you be working on the solution with the United States? Because Hamas will not accept that. Hamas wants an unconditional end to the war. They want a complete pullout of troops as well. Will Israeli government do that, or would you want Israeli forces presence to remain in Gaza even after the war comes to an end?
That's exactly right. Hamas does not want to end the war that it started. Hamas is holding on to 50 hostages. 20 of them are still alive as bargaining chips to make sure it survives the war it started, so that it can start preparing the next October 7th massacre and preparing for the next war against Israel. And Israel wants this to be the last war against Gaza. And that's why the terrorists who started this war have to lay down their arms and relinquish power. So we need pressure from the whole Arab world on Hamas to tell them, after the war, you can't govern Gaza anymore. The concrete that goes in has to go for people's houses. It can't go to the military tunnels underneath Gaza. Reconstruction can't begin if it means the reconstruction of Hamas, or we will be in another war all over again. So Israel is looking for an end to this war that puts Gaza in the hands of local Palestinians operating under international Arab leadership who do not want war with Israel. And Israel will want to maintain security control in Gaza and probably maintain a perimeter around Gaza so that it can stop any terrorists using that territory to invade Israel. Because the Gaza Strip is, only a couple of football fields away from houses inside Israel. And we cannot take the risk that this territory will be a launchpad for more attacks by jihadists like Hamas in the future. Right. This has to be the last Gaza war.
Okay, now in the backdrop of that short but intense conflict that Israel had with Iran, does Israel have the wherewithal to continue with this conflict against the Hamas if the talks were to fail and you don't get a deal on your terms?
Over the last 2 years, the Iranian axis of terrorist armies across the Middle East has collapsed. Israel just launched a 12-day campaign to destroy the Iranian regime's nuclear facilities. And even Hezbollah, Iran's proxy army in Lebanon, didn't come to Iran's help. It was all alone. There's now talk of possible peace talks with Lebanon and Syria that are trying to break free from Iranian rule. This is an amazingly positive development towards peace and stability in the Middle East. And in all that, Hamas is alone. Israel is able to divert military forces towards Gaza if need be. And therefore it's able to, wave a big stick at Hamas and say, if you do not agree to end this war, to free the hostages, to relinquish power, then we can continue this war against this terrorist organization. And everyone now needs to be demanding, it's time for this war to end. Hamas has to free the hostages already. We know they're being abused in tunnels under Gaza. It has to free the hostages. It has to lay down its arms, and it has to let the whole Middle East move on towards a better future of peace and stability and prosperity.
All right. Thank you very much for joining us, Eylon Levy, with those
pleasure as always,
and your view on the current situation and around the ceasefire as well. Let's move on and get